It's 5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up within the hour. U.S. President Donald Trump lashes out at Israel and Iran as he accuses both sides of violating terms of their ceasefire. Iran responds to U.S. attacks on its nuclear facilities targeting U.S. military base in Qatar. Plus, NATO commits $40 billion in security aid for Ukraine as summit kicks off in The Hague. Let's begin with our top stories. Well, frustration aptly describes the U.S. President Donald Trump's feelings over the latest developments in the Middle East after the ceasefire he brokered between Israel and Iran appeared to grow more fragile. A White House source says President Trump made a firm and direct phone call to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after Israel Defense Forces reportedly struck Iranian targets despite a truce being in effect. Israel confirmed it had hit an Iranian radar station but said it refrained from further attacks after U.S. President Donald Trump's intervention. Well, earlier in the day, Israel accused Iran of violating the ceasefire just 2 hours after the deal was reached. Defense Minister Israel Katz vowed to respond with intense strikes on regime targets in Tehran after accusing Iran of launching missiles even with the truce still in place. Iran denies the accusations, insisting it respects the terms and will continue to do so if Israel stops its attacks. Well, the ceasefire brokered by the U.S. president and Qatar came into effect after Iranian strikes killed residents in Israel. An Iranian ballistic missile hit an apartment block in the southern Israeli city of Beersheba, killing at least 4 people. Iranian forces reportedly launched 20 missiles across multiple locations in Israel, many of them intercepted by Israeli defense systems. Rescue workers are picking through the ruins of the building, searching for possible survivors trapped under the rubble. And in another development, Iran launched missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar late on Monday in what it says is in retaliation for America's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. Doha residents reported loud bangs while videos showed bright flashes as air defense systems attempted to intercept missiles. President Donald Trump dismissed the attack as very weak and said it was expected. He added that peace talks could still continue and announced today that the ceasefire was now in effect. In the aftermath of the crisis, oil prices have plunged nearly 5% despite the ceasefire announcement between Israel and Iran. After nearly 2 weeks of conflict, Brent crude, the international benchmark for global oil prices, fell to $68 a barrel, below the level it was at when Israel launched missiles against Iran's nuclear sites on June 13. Prices had spiked in recent days as concerns grew that Iran could disrupt global supplies by blockading the Strait of Hormuz, a key shipping route for oil and gas. Stock markets in the UK, Europe, and Asia rose after President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire. Well, amid escalating tensions in the Middle East, the leader of South Africa's economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema, has slammed Israel and countries he labels Western imperialists for their role in global conflicts and domination of African countries. Mr. Malema warned Israel that the world is watching and cautioned that history will judge it harshly for its military actions in the Middle East. Mr. Malema's remarks follows U.S. airstrikes on 3 nuclear facilities in Iran and over a week of intense air war between Tehran and Tel Aviv.
We say today at the funeral of our young people that our struggle is global. The pain of our children is connected to the pain of children in Palestine, where bombs are dropped on homes, hospitals, and schools. The screams of mothers in Gaza echo the cries we hear here. We say to the Israeli apartheid regime, the world is watching and history will judge you harshly. The EFF stands firmly with the people of Palestine and will never be neutral in the face of genocide. We stand in full solidarity with Iran, a country under siege from Western imperialism for choosing independence. We reject the bullying of this nation by the United States, Israel, and its allies. And we stand by their right to defend themselves by any means necessary. Let Israel finally have a taste of the devastation and violence it has perpetrated in Gaza. We are anti-imperialist because we understand that our struggle for freedom is bound to the struggle of all oppressed people across the world. As we reflect on the lives of the young people we are laying to rest today, young people whose lives were full of potential and courage, we must also lift our eyes beyond our borders and draw strength from examples of youth who are living proof that another future is possible. One such example is the fearless and principled revolutionary, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso, who took power not out of greed, but out of an urgent need to liberate his people from the clutches of neocolonialism and foreign military domination. Traore is a living symbol of the return of revolutionary leadership in Africa. He is a young man who, like Thomas Sankara before him, has rejected Western puppet regime, expelled French troops from Burkina Faso soil, and reclaimed the dignity of his people. At only 36 years old, Traore has shown more courage and conviction than many leaders twice his age. He has put his life on the line to defend his nation's sovereignty and natural resources. He has stood firm in the face of threats from imperialist forces, and he has remained the world that Africa is not for sale. We invoke his name here today because he represents the future our young people could have. Because when we speak of the youth who died in this tragedy, we must also speak of the youth who are still standing, still fighting, and still changing the world. Captain Traore is one of them.
Meanwhile, hundreds of activists from various organizations staged a rally opposite the U.S. Embassy in London against the war on Iran. The rally was organized by the Stop the War Coalition, with representatives from the group denouncing the U.S. and its approach to the conflict. Activists blame the U.S. for provoking instability, with some accusing the Trump administration of negotiating in bad faith while launching strikes.
The only democratic government in Iran's history was overthrown by the CIA.
We're here because Donald Trump is taking us to the brink of a regional conflict in the Middle East and potentially even world war. When you think about the fact that Donald Trump has been absolutely instrumental in supporting the genocide against the people of Gaza and now has launched an attack on a sovereign country that is already spiralling possibly into a regional conflict, why are the British police protecting them?
I was always supportive of a deal. I don't know how possible it is right now because Iran was negotiating and they've driven Iran away from the negotiating table. I don't know how they can trust to come back to negotiations because it was always in bad faith, apparently. The whole negotiation was a smokescreen for attacks. The British government should for sure, first of all, not support Israel, not follow America into this stupid war, and pressure them to come back to the table in good faith.
I'm here today because of Israel's illegal war in Iran. We have a UK government who are not just complicit, but active participants in the genocide that Iran is nowhere near having nuclear weapons and are not an imminent threat to anyone. So to have done this on the false premises, and also to know now that hundreds of innocent people are dead, thousands of people are injured, should be unacceptable to anyone.
Let's bring in international affairs analyst Accuses to help us unpack these fast-moving developments. He joins us from Abuja, the nation's capital. Accuses, pleasure to have you on the program.
It's a pleasure too.
A lot has happened since the announcement of a truce, well, a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Is this a ceasefire or is it not?
Well, they said the sweetness of the pudding is in the testing, and obviously, in matters such as this, ceasefires can be a bit problematic, because you're hoping that all sides will act in good faith and abide, the conditions of the ceasefire, with the conditions of the ceasefire. No sooner had Donald Trump, the American president, announced the ceasefire than a few hours later, we are told that it had been violated. The Israelis said it was the Iranians, and of course, the Iranians would say it's the Israelis. They would not admit that they are the ones. So you don't know exactly who is doing the violation of the ceasefire, in terms of the ceasefire. But then, at least the good thing about it is that both sides have agreed in the first instance to even have a ceasefire. So even if there's a violation, at least there's a basis for them to go back to the negotiating table, and then perhaps withdraw the terms of the ceasefire, or to compel both sides to be of good behavior. And I think that this it's now incumbent upon the United States that has mediated. But of course, you know that America is not a neutral party in this matter. America is very much involved, and they're obviously pro-Israel. After all, they were the ones that launched the attack against the Fordo, Fordo, in Fordo, where they have the nuclear facility. But at least the good thing is that both sides agreed to have a ceasefire, and let's see how that is going to hold. It, of course, is a good thing, because there's no doubt that the world is on edge, and they were already beginning to see the repercussions of what is happening. Of course, whenever you have any crisis or hostilities in the Middle East, the very first thing you see at the international level is that the prices of oil go up, and there's a lot of instability, especially now that Iran is also talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz, where about 20% of the world's shipment goes through. So that in itself would be added crisis to what is already going on.
Right, and you just mentioned, that U.S. president, or United States is doing a lot here because it's pro-Israel. We do know that it's allies with the Israeli government. So how does Israel listen to an ally in, when it comes to issues of tensions such as this, thinking that, I'm your ally, I'll do what I want, I get away with it, you will just caution me, but then you will still support me?
Yeah, well, I think that is a dilemma, really. And again, that has a lot to do on the credibility of the American president, because everybody is watching him. It is known that America has always been closely aligned with Israel, regardless of the political party. All political parties, are aligned with Israel. They are sworn to defending Israel, no matter the circumstances. And we have seen that over the years. And so perhaps one would feel or has this impression that sometimes America tends to have to pamper Israel. But is it that America is pampering Israel, or perhaps Israel has a leverage over America? Of course, you know what is happening with IPAC. IPAC is a very, very influential group, body in the United States that has helped to bankroll the elections of many American politicians. So there's always that sense of wariness when they want to come down hard on Israel. And that comes to bear, sometimes. Beyond that, once in a while, I think America, has the capacity to exercise some bit of restraint on Israel, and it does work, depending on who is doing the pushing. For instance, we're told that, we've read that, the early stages of this hostility, when the Israelis were busy taking out, generals and scientists in Iran, very prominent people, that there was it was also on the card that they would take out the Iranian leader Khamenei, but it was Donald Trump that stopped any attempts to assassinate him, and that is very possible also. So I think that there's some restraining force that America can use on Israel. And they have their, after all, they have been always there in the defense of Israel. Some of these drones, some of these missiles that are ballistic missiles are being fired into Israel are being brought down by American, Patriot system. And so they have what it takes, I believe, to put enough pressure on Israel to hold their hands and to stop further aggression. It's within their orbit to be able to do that.
Right, and given 12 days of deadly escalation, what do you think motivated Israel and Iran to agree to a ceasefire now?
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly, this. Yes, I agree that Israel says that they are in charge of the airspace, and that is very true. In modern warfare, it never used to be as important, fundamentally important, in the prosecution of war, that you want to gain air dominance. But we saw with what happened in the Second Gulf War in Iraq, the importance of air power, air superiority. We saw also in the Balkans, in the Balkans, in the war, what the Europeans and the Americans did, by making sure that they had complete control of the airspace. We have also seen, even in Libya, and that was what they did, because the moment they controlled the airspace, then they determined what was going to happen, on the ground. And so for Israel, yes, they have been able to have some dominance, in the air, but ultimately battles are fought on land. And so you cannot just keep on bombing, without, for you to achieve your objective, you have to put troops on ground. And I'm sure that Israel does not want to do that. Obviously, America is not going to follow suit. So what has brought them to the negotiating table? Yes, Israel has done more of the killings in terms of the casualties in Iran. But the reality is that regardless of the deployment of the Iron Dome and, some of these other military arsenal to shoot down these ballistic missiles, a lot of them have gotten into, Israel, especially getting into places like Tel Aviv and causing death and destruction. And so Israel has realized that it is not as easy, as perhaps they might have thought. They say they have taken out about 60% of the launchers that launch these, ballistic missiles, but still the Iranian, ballistic missiles have been devastating also. So when you see this and look at the balance of forces, yes, it's in favor of Israel. But Israel also, I think, is wise to realize that they cannot continue this on the long run. So it makes a lot of sense for them to come to the negotiating table and discuss. And as for Iran, all their allies have been hampered, have been, hamstrung. We have seen what has happened in southern, Lebanon with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been decimated to some extent, to a very large extent, and they are no longer what, they used to be. In Syria, Trump has gotten the Islamic regime in Syria to make peace with Israel, unprecedented. And then, of course, in Yemen, the Houthis have been silenced to a very large extent. So the normal traditional allies that Iran, has nurtured, set up and nurtured all these years are no longer there, because by now they would have been firing missiles and raining hell on Israel. So on all sides, there are deficits, and also there are, one or two advantages. And I think that these are the things that have contributed to both sides wanting peace. Of course, if America is not ready to go all the way with Israel, Israel would be a bit wary about wanting, to continue to prosecute this war. And for Iran, they are the receiving end too, and it also makes sense for them to take stock of their situation and look for peace.
Right, and the U.S. president had gone on and on about how the nuclear facilities in Iran are a major threat, globally. Why do you think he suddenly wanted a ceasefire now? after, attacking all the attacks that he also made towards Iran?
Well, one thing about Trump is that Trump, people could say, yes, that Trump, it can be quite spontaneous. Yes, it can be quite spontaneous, but there is nothing new about Trump. If you go back 15, 20 years, ago, everything that Trump is doing, he was saying it publicly. He had also said that Iraq, under no circumstances, must Iran be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And again, perhaps we might not blame them to some extent, really. Of course, the Americans and the Israelis have broken, certain bounds when it comes to international law. There have been a violation to quite some extent. But again, if Iran keeps on calling America the great Satan, and then Israel the small Satan, and then they vow to destroy the great Satan and the small Satan, how can the small Satan and the great Satan sit by and allow the country that says that they are going to wipe them off the face of the earth to have a nuclear weapon? So it's naturally a given that they are going to, want to look for a way to eliminate these weapons, because it will pose a clear and existential problem for them. And so Donald Trump has achieved what he has always wanted, to ensure that that Iran no longer has the capacity to develop a nuclear weapon. Though, in fairness to Iran, they had always said that it was being developed for peaceful purposes. But I guess that those ones that the America and the Israel did not want to take any chance. So, I mean, all around the elimination of Iranian officials by the Israelis, I think, is not consistent with international law. It is wrong. But again, you also look at when people talk about the rules-based international order, there is nothing like that, really. There's a jungle out there. And so what they show from time to time is that power is might. If you are big, if you're strong, if you're powerful, you can commit certain atrocities and get away with it. But woe betide you if you're a much smaller nation. You'll be subject to certain, international rules. And so this is exactly, this is quite unfair, but that is the way it is.
Right, and finally, President Trump has dismissed Iranian strikes on the U.S. military base in Qatar as weak. He said it was expected. For someone that's seeking a ceasefire, how much, ego do you think will play up on the side of the Iranians to say, okay, you think we're weak, we'll show you that we're strong? And for the fact that many have been killed in Israel and also some in Iran as well, do you think Iran is suffering more in this conflict?
Yeah, well, first of all, Iran had vowed that they were going to punish America. And so there's a lot that has to do with international prestige for some of these countries. Sometimes they do certain things that are purely symbolic, even if even though they are not effective, and everybody knows that they will not be effective. So in a way, the Americans allowed the ballistic missiles, perhaps, come and get all the way to Qatar and strike it down. And it is also not impossible that Iranians might have informed them that these missiles are going to be fired. This is what happens in international, in international affairs. A lot of people do not know that when Iran had some issues with Pakistan, and I think people from one of the countries was killed, they had to allow the other country to also have a reprisal, attack, because international prestige is at stake. And so, but what happens is that you do it with moderation. And that's why you can see that America had warned Iran not to retaliate, not to attack American targets. And Iraq actually sent a missile to the American military base in Qatar, but it was intercepted. And what did Trump do? Trump said, well, they have run out of steam, that it's a weak attack. And he hopes that the Iranians have satisfied themselves. So at that level, you know that everybody is trying to de-escalate for the good of everybody, because nobody knows how far this crisis is going to go if you allow it to continue to degenerate. Right. So yeah, I think Iran has suffered much more. Iran has suffered, much more. They have suffered the elimination of a lot of their scientists. who have been working on this nuclear program for quite some time, they have suffered the losses of the heads of their military and security institutions. And so it has been severe, and of course civilians too, at the same time, even though the Israelis have suffered also losses, and perhaps they didn't think that, they thought that with their Iron Dome, that they will have enough to stop so many of these, perhaps all of these missiles from getting into Israel. These missiles got as far as Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel, caused extensive damage, and also killed people. But on the scale of, on the balance of the losses, you would say that Iran has suffered much more.
Right. I must thank you for your time, International Affairs Analyst Accuses today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome back to the program. More on the crisis in the Middle East and that of Europe, where Russia and Ukraine are also embroiled in a crisis. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has thrown his support behind Israel and Ukraine with regards to their different crises. Mr. Carney lent his support to both countries at the Canada-EU summit in Brussels, where he focused instead on Iran's record of sponsoring terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. When asked if the airstrikes violated international law, he said terrorism, these are the real violations of international law, not the U.S. response.
Line mentioned Iran has pursued nuclear weapons. Well, Iran has expressed a desire to eliminate the state of Israel, where the state of Iran has been a sponsor of terrorism, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and beyond. And where at least in our opinion, Canada has listed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, active terrorist organization. These are violations of international law. These are the ones we looked at. In terms of relative comfort,
Mr. Carney also reaffirmed Canada's alignments with Europe on the Ukraine war, unveiling new sanctions and additional military and financial aid. He said Canada will attend the upcoming reconstruction conference in Italy and will continue to defend Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democracy.
Released our latest sanctions, financial sanctions, with respect to Ukraine. The European Union is preparing its 18th sanction package, a very significant package of sanctions. We've just released our latest sanctions, financial sanctions, against Russia, against the Shadow Fleet, against enablers of the Russian regime. We have just committed additional financing to the Ukrainian government and additional military assistance to Ukraine. As President von der Leyen mentioned, we will be participating in the foreign ministers here, we're participating in the reconstruction conference that Italy is leading on behalf of the European Union in a few weeks, because we know, and this is the other element of comfort, that we will stand up and defend these fundamental values, international law, territorial integrity, the rights of state, and democracy as represented in Ukraine. So yes, we take comfort from that alignment, and it is a very effective partnership as a consequence.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has secured a major military co-production deal with the United Kingdom. The deal was announced after a meeting he held with Prime Minister Keir Starmer at number 10 Downing Street. Mr. Zelensky also met with King Charles III at Windsor Castle as a symbolic show of unity ahead of the NATO summit in The Hague. Prime Minister Starmer described the deal as a massive step forward, highlighting the role of UK expertise in drone technology and battlefield coordination. The agreement includes joint production of long-range drones and advanced weapons systems, as well as plans to integrate Ukraine's frontline innovations with the UK's defense industry. President Zelensky said the deal will transform both nations, and officials say it includes scaled-up troop training programs. Since 2022, the UK has helped train over 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And with Russia launching a renewed offensive in Ukraine, NATO leaders gathering in The Hague are pledging stronger and more permanent support for Kyiv. Secretary General Mark Rutte told reporters that Ukraine would have the alliance leaders' ears and full attention despite their members' only working session during the Hague summit, which is underway amid a geopolitical storm fueled by tension over Iran. He called Russia the most significant and direct threat to the alliance and vowed unwavering and persistent support to Ukraine's defense. He also announced ahead of the NATO summit that allied pledges for Ukraine's defense have reached over $40.2 billion by mid-2025. Key decisions expected at the summit include new funding benchmarks, joint training initiatives, and a long-term plan for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction and defense integration.
European and Canadian allies have now pledged more than 35 billion euros in support for Ukraine, which is more than last year, because last year, for the full year, it was over 50 billion. Now, before the 1st of July, it is already 35 billion. So we can safely assume that for the full year, it will be more than last year. And then, of course, I cannot disclose anything about the summit declaration, but we can be safe to assume that in the summit declaration there will be important language about Ukraine and the support for Ukraine, also financially, going forward. And this is important because what we have seen over the last couple of weeks is unacceptable. It is Russia starting 3.5 years ago this totally unprovoked war against Ukraine, the full onslaught. They already started in 2014, but the full onslaught starting in February 2022, and now the last couple of weeks these indiscriminate attacks on innocent civilians living in cities, living in communities in Ukraine, who go about their daily lives and get killed or seriously wounded because of these Russian drones and whatever. So this is terrible. So everybody's very motivated. Please understand that. I hear from all the allies to keep you strong, to keep you in the fight, and to bring this terrible war to a durable and lasting peace.
I'm happy that to be here, and that summit is in Netherlands. Big our friend, and I'm very thankful for your participation and your personal involvement. Yes, and really I always counted on it and count, and I'm very happy that we are on a constant line, on direct line, bilateral, yes, by phone, yes, always about what we need, urgent needs, like it was when you was a Prime Minister, and now when you're Secretary. I'm happy that we have such relations. And also the decision of Washington Summit, which been last year, very important that this direction is not changing. Thank you so much. Thank you that you mentioned it. About it, we still need air defense, and we still have support on this direction from the partners, and really count on continuation.
Well, Mr. Rutte is also full of praises for U.S. President Donald Trump for making Europe pay in a big way on increased defense spending. According to a private message between the two, Mr. Rutte told Mr. Trump that his pressure on Europe had driven NATO to a really important moment. The U.S. president posted a screenshot of the message to his social media platform, highlighting Mr. Rutte's praise for his demand that European nations raise their defense spending to 5% of the GDP. According to the U.S. president, the U.S. president has long criticized European allies for not pulling their weight in defense contributions, and while global leaders have questions, that pressure seems to be yielding results.
Question number one was, Mark, is the US still with us? Yes, they are. You might want to turn on your television when Emmanuel Macron is visiting the Oval Office, when Keir Starmer is visiting the Oval Office, when Giorgia Meloni is... Hey, by the way, when I was visiting, you might want to see that footage. There is total commitment by the US president and the US senior leadership to NATO. However, it comes with an expectation. And the expectation is that we will finally deal with this huge pebble in the shoe, this huge irritant, which is that we are not spending enough as Europeans and Canadians. And they want us to equalize with what the US is spending. And when it comes to this famous 5%, the US is basically there. When you look at what they spend on core, but also on all the defense and security-related investments. But they want to equalize what they're spending with us. And for us, of course, the main argument is not to equalize. Yes, that is important because it is fair. But the real reason to do this, the first reason to do this, is the Russia threat. So these things come together. And then the second question was, okay, so the US will stay with us. They are committed to Article 5. We believe you, Mark. But hey, then they might pull down the troop numbers in Europe without making pre-announcements. And Sakur, our most senior commander in NATO, might be a European, a Brit or a German leading the military side of the alliance. There are many reasons why it is an American, because America is delivering all these enablers to NATO, also in Europe. So you want a US senior general to lead the military alliance on the military side. I said, well, okay, I don't think it will happen. And hey, guess what? The new Supreme Allied Commander has been announced, and last time I checked his passport, it was US. So that didn't happen. So my message to my European colleagues is stop worrying so much. Start to make sure that you get the investment plans done, that you get industrial base up and running, that the support for Ukraine remains at a high level. Luckily, it is still today. I mean, this is what you should work on, and stop running around being worried about the US. They are with us.
In the meantime, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pledged to meet a new NATO target to spend 5% of the country's GDP on national security by 2035. At a NATO summit in the Netherlands, 32 member countries, including the UK, are expected to agree to a 5% goal, with 3.5% to go on core defence and the remaining 1.5% on defence-related areas such as resilience and security. The split target is aimed at placating US President Donald Trump, who has urged NATO allies to spend more while giving cash-strapped EU countries flexibilities over how they meet the target. Downing Street has argued measures on energy and tackling smuggling gangs could be classified as security spending. Meanwhile, Conservative Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Pretty has accused ministers of announcing the target with no new money to fund it, saying government should raise funding sooner due to the dangerous state of geopolitics. Extinction Rebellion activists have attempted to block motorway access to the NATO summit in the Netherlands in protest against the bloc's military spending and the global climate crisis. However, police intervened before the group could reach the A44 motorway near Abenis, which had already been sealed off as part of security arrangements for the upcoming NATO summit. Footage currently displaying show protesters crossing a dike using a wooden slab, clashing with police, waving flags and banners as officers used force to disperse them and arrests were made. The protesters claim that NATO's 5% of GDP defense spending target will lead to an enormous rise in carbon emissions. This demonstration comes ahead of the summit schedule the protest was held ahead of the summit, which is ongoing and will go on until tomorrow in The Hague, where member states are set to focus on strengthening defense and deterrence strategies.
Just like Gandhi, just like Martin Luther King, we've got nothing else except our bodies to try and put in the way. Maybe eventually people will see, instead of running away from the problem of the climate emergency and the fossil fuels that are causing it, instead of that, they actually turn around, face the problem and sort it out.
We want to let the people know that security is not only a military problem, but it's a climate problem and a climate crisis problem as well. And it's important to actually be solidarity, to show solidarity with the South, because the climate crisis actually creates lots of problems there that flows to the north, and that's why it's much more makes much more sense to actually spend money helping the south with the climate crisis and helping the north with their wars.
This highway over there is where all the government leaders of NATO will drive from their private jets to their fancy hotels in The Hague. And we are very worried about the climate crisis and the state that the world is in. So we want to ask them to please not only meet about weapons and money, but also talk about climate and about the crises that are ahead. So we are asking all the NATO leaders, all the governments who are driving in this highway the coming days to please do what they have to do to keep everyone in the world safe, and especially our brothers and sisters in the global south, because they are already suffering daily with hunger, floods, terrible weather, natural disasters, war, against climate emergency. There's a lot of proof that spending 5% for all the NATO countries will lead to an enormous rise in CO2 emissions, and we just cannot afford that as a world, to increase our CO2 emissions by that much in such a short amount of time. So actually the rearming Europe that the NATO is already currently planning will lead to an additional exhaust similar to twice what the Netherlands produces in a year, and that's a lot.
And we're back in London, where demonstrators have clashed with police in Trafalgar Square as hundreds denounce UK government's plan to designate Palestine Action as a terrorist organization. Demonstrators condemned the government's decision to proscribe the pro-Palestine group, saying it will backfire, labeling it an attack on freedom itself. The protest comes after Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced that she will proscribe Palestine Action and designate the group as a terrorist organization, citing actions including the recent break-in and vandalism at RAF Norton.
The PAL Action in particular has been targeted as an organization, unbelievably as a terrorist organization. For the past 20-odd years, I've been campaigning against anti-terror laws in this country, only for an organization that is not involved in any violence, hasn't harmed any individual, for this organization and the people that are part of it to be proscribed as terrorists is unbelievable. We've got youngsters here who have no palpable connection to terrorism being potentially imprisoned as terrorists. The law's gone mad.
Putting paint in a plane's jet engine is nothing compared to bombing innocent civilians.
I think this is going to backfire on them. I think it's going to expose the hypocrisy of the British government as they continue to arm a terrorist state themselves, and that they are trying to prescribe an organisation that is aiming to shut down Israel's largest weapons manufacturer as they kill hundreds of thousands of people.
I think there needs to be a public inquiry into the depth and scale of Zionist Israeli influence amongst the whole establishment.
I think this is happening within the police, this is happening within our government in terms of prescription, and we have to say no more. We're a sovereign country. We should not tolerate our government working on behalf of a genocidal foreign power, which even before the genocide was a brutal occupying apartheid entity. So enough.
I'm a supporter of Palestine Action. I have been for a while. I think that they're very, very brave people. You know, they are a moral conscience. Really, they take the risks that we're frightened to take to oppose genocide. To call them terrorists, I think, is a disgusting assault on our freedoms. Really.
In the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court has handed a major win to President Donald Trump, allowing the resumption of deportations to third-party countries. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices reversed a lower court order that required U.S. immigration officials to offer migrants a meaningful opportunity to explain risks of being deported to nations they are not from. The case involved 8 migrants from countries including Myanmar, Mexico, and Vietnam who were deported to South Sudan in May this year. The Trump administration described the group as the worst of the worst, whose deportations are necessary for national security. The court's 3 liberal judges dissented from the majority ruling, saying it was rewarding lawlessness. Welcome back. Mali and Russia have signed a series of agreements aimed at expanding mutual trade and strengthening economic ties, according to details released by the Kremlin. Among the deals signed is a pledge for greater cooperation on nuclear energy. The announcement of deals came during a state visit by Mali's junta leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, to Moscow, which included 2 hours of talks with President Vladimir Putin. Colonel Goïta has boosted relations with Russia since seizing power in 2021, while reducing ties with former colonial power France, reflecting a broader regional trend, with neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger also pivoting towards Russia after the overthrow of civilian leaders. Speaking during the visit, President Vladimir Putin says that while trade ties with Mali are modest, there's an upward trend, and future areas of cooperation will be in geological exploration, energy, logistics, and the humanitarian field. In response, Colonel Goïta expressed gratitude for Russia's warm welcome and affirmed Mali's willingness to strengthen the cooperation, which he claims covers many sectors. In the heart of Seoul, the 2025 Moonlight Yoga event opened Monday night, drawing dozens of yoga enthusiasts for a peaceful evening under the stars. Held in the Gwanghwamun Square, one of the capital's most iconic public spaces, the event had been postponed due to rain, but finally kicked off with glowing lanterns and soft music. K-yoga, or Korean-style yoga, blends traditional postures with Korean wellness practices and meditative breathing techniques. An instructor at the event described it as a celebration of harmony, where people from all over the world come together to breathe and stretch in unison.
We're gonna do this 3 times. 시선도 따라가요. 심장이 좀 더 확장되고요.
That's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Jackie Rogers.